Okay, this is a lecture over the first part of chapter 6, 6.1. This is critical stuff, so I'm going to try to go as carefully as I can. We will review it when I get back after the conference week, but it's very important, more than the other stuff that we've been covering. All right, so chapter 6 talks about categorical syllogisms. And so we're going to start with standard form categorical syllogisms. This is all 6.1. So here's an argument. No heroes are cowards. Some soldiers are cowards. Therefore, some soldiers are not heroes. All right, first of all, in chapter 5, we talked about categorical propositions or statements. There we talked about single statements, like the very first line, no heroes are cowards. That's a categorical statement because it's an all, some, none, or some not. It's an E statement. No heroes are cowards. Some soldiers are cowards. That's another statement. That's an I statement. Therefore, some soldiers are not heroes. There's an O statement. So this is something that has three different categorical statements in it. But they're put together to form a categorical syllogism, an argument. So this is an argument because the first two statements are supposed to convince us of the third. So what we're doing in chapter 6 and 7 is not looking at individual statements, we're looking at entire arguments. That is the way that we can put statements together, and then we're asking whether those statements together lead us to the conclusion or not. So in this case, we're asking, does that first E statement and that second I statement lead us to the last O statement? Before I go on, just stop and think about that. Does that seem true? If you knew that no heroes were cowards, if that was true, and if you knew that some soldiers are cowards, would that convince you that some soldiers are not heroes? And it should, because this is a valid argument. If the first two statements were true for sure, if it's true that no heroes are cowards but some soldiers are, then the soldiers that are cowards wouldn't be heroes. So that would mean that the third statement would have to be true. So this is a valid argument, and that's what we're looking at here. Now let me give you a different argument, and we'll do the same thing again. Here's a new argument. No realistic paintings are abstract paintings. Some good paintings are abstract paintings. Therefore, some good paintings are not realistic paintings. Now, this again has an E statement and an I statement leading to an O statement. The whole thing is what's called a categorical syllogism. And once again, if you think about it, this is actually also valid. If the first two statements are true, the third one also has to be. But there's something else about this. This is exactly the same pattern as the first one. Both of these do this. They say no X are Y, some Z are Y, therefore some Z are not X. In other words, we're doing exactly the same reasoning in the first case about heroes, cowards, and soldiers, and in the second case about realistic, abstract, and good paintings. The pattern is exactly the same. And as a result, if it's valid with the first one, it turns out it also has to be valid with the second one. The point is that it doesn't even matter what we're talking about, heroes or cowards or soldiers or paintings. Whatever we're talking about, if our pattern has this form, this pattern, no X or Y, some Z or Y, therefore some Z are not X, it will be valid. That's enough to give us validity. Now when the book talks about these, it doesn't call them X and Y and Z, it calls them S and P and M. So we get this. I'll talk about where those come from later on, but for now, this is the way we'll show it. No P or M, some S or M, therefore some S are not P. And this pattern will turn out to always be valid. This was the pattern. No P or M, some S or M, therefore some S are not P. Now later on, what we're going to do is analyze this pattern. This is what I'm going to be talking about in this lecture. So I'll tell you ahead of time what it's going to look like. We're going to look at this, and we're going to first of all look on the left-hand side. I'm sorry, I'm going to put my answer on the left-hand side, but we're first of all going to look at the statements. And we're going to say, what type of statement is each one of these? Well, the first one's an E statement. The second one's an I statement, and the third one is an O statement. So we will call that the mood. We will say that the mood of this thing is EIO. I'm going to talk all about this later on, but I just want to show you where we're headed. The second thing we're going to do is look at the pattern of the S's and the P's and the M's, and we're going to look at where the M's are. And if they're both on the right-hand side like this, we're going to say that that has figure 2. So we're going to talk about moods and figures. And I'll talk about all later, but the mood has to do with what kinds of statements are they, E or I or O or A, and the figure has to do with where are the M's in the pattern. And we'll put those together, and we'll say that the form of this statement is EIO2. Okay? So I haven't told you how to figure out the mood, although you can figure that out already. I definitely haven't told you how to get the figure, but you can see that the form is getting the mood and the figure and putting them together. That's one of the main things we're focusing on today. All right, and by the way, EIO2 is always valid. Let's do another example. All artists are egotists. All artists are poppers. Therefore, all poppers are egotists. All right, again, this is a categorical syllogism because every single statement is a categorical statement. In this case, they're all A statements. And again, it's an argument because we're trying to say that if the first two are true, the third one should be. So ask yourself, again, is this valid? If it's true, now it may not be true, but if it's true, it definitely isn't true, but if it's true that all artists are egotists, and if it's true that all artists are poppers, does that mean that all poppers are egotists? And you should say, no, that's not valid. There could be other kinds of poppers who aren't egotists and who aren't artists. So this is really not a valid pattern. Here's another example. This one's easier to see. All mothers are parents, that's true. All mothers are females, that's true. Therefore, all females are parents, that's false. So what you can see is that this pattern is not valid. The first two things can be true, and yet the third one isn't. But they both are exactly the same pattern. Here it is with X's and Y's. Here it is with M's, P's, and S's. This pattern, all M are P, all M are S, therefore all S are P, is invalid. It's invalid whether you talk about artists, egotists, and poppers, or whether you talk about mothers, parents, and females, or whether you talk about anything else. Any argument you make that has this pattern will not be a valid argument. So here's the pattern. Eventually we will say what mood is this, and we'll say it's AAA because all three of them are A's. And then we'll say what figure is this, and we'll say it's figure 3 because figure 3 is the one with the M's in that position. And we'll say what mood is it, and what form is it, and the answer will be AAA3. And we'll ask, is it valid? And the answer will be no. AAA3 is never valid, no matter what you're talking about. All right, so now let's dig into how to get there. First of all, what's a categorical syllogism technically? Well, it's called categorical because every statement has to be categorical. You have to have A, E, I, or O. And it's called a syllogism because there are 3 terms, each one used in 2 of the 3 propositions. Here's what I mean. This argument right here is a categorical syllogism because first of all, it's categorical. Everything is an A, E, I, or O statement. It's an E followed by I followed by O. But second of all, look at the terms. The first term we have is heroes, and that occurs twice. Once at the top, once at the conclusion. Sorry, that underline is a little misplaced. Then there's another term, cowards. That occurs twice, once in the first line and once in the second. And then finally, there's the term soldiers. That occurs twice, once in the second line, one in the third. So we have 3 terms only, heroes, cowards, and soldiers, and each one is used twice. That's what you need for a syllogism. You need 3 different terms, each one used twice, one in each of 2 different syllogisms, and if you 2 different statements. And if you get that, you have a categorical syllogism. The second thing is that you need them to be in standard form. So what does standard form mean? Well, first of all, it means that the individual statements are in standard form, and that just means they're phrased correctly as categorical statements. But secondly, it means that the 3 are arranged in standard order. There's a certain order which is correct and another one which is not standard. So the one we've been using, no heroes are cowards, some soldiers are cowards, therefore some soldiers are not heroes, is in standard order. I haven't talked yet about what standard order is, but when we do, you'll see that this is in standard order. But this would not be in standard order. If you first of all said some soldiers are not heroes, and then said no heroes are cowards and some soldiers are cowards, if you put the conclusion last, that would not be in standard order, or first, that would not be in standard order. But this is also not in standard order. Some soldiers are cowards, no heroes are cowards. Therefore, some soldiers are not heroes. If you just reverse the first 2, that's not standard order either. Now, why? Well, we're about to talk about it. But for now, my point is, without your knowing what standard order is yet, that there is this thing called a standard order, and you have to learn how to put things in the right order. Okay, so understanding standard order. Here's our statement. It starts by looking at the conclusion. The predicate of the conclusion is known as the major term. So there's a lot of vocabulary here for you to learn. The first vocabulary is the word first piece of vocabulary is the word major term. Heroes here is the major term wherever it occurs. Now the subject of the conclusion is the minor term, soldiers, wherever it occurs. That's why so S, the minor term, the book will always use S to stand for the minor term because it's the subject of the conclusion. And it'll use P to stand for the major term because it's the predicate of the conclusion. Now, notice, by the way, this is backwards from what you'll want to do. You'll want to say that the major term is the subject because major should come first. But the major term always comes at the end. So it's the very last thing in your syllogism. Heroes, that's the major term. And then the other term left over is the middle term. And we'll use an M for that. So here you can see that the major term is heroes, the minor term is soldiers, and the middle term is cowards. Okay. The major premise is the premise that uses the major term. So which of the two, there's two premises here, they're the first two statements. No heroes or cowards, some soldiers are cowards. Which one of those uses the major term? Well, the major term is heroes, so the major premise is the one that uses heroes. And then the minor premise is the one using the minor term. That's the other one, using the word soldiers. And then I didn't mention it, but the conclusion, of course, is the third term. So we have major premise, minor premise, and conclusion. The standard order is to always put the major premise first, always put the minor premise second, and always put the conclusion third. So this is complicated, I'm sure, right now, but you'll get used to it. It becomes fairly straightforward. But this is what standard order means. It means major premise first, minor premise second, conclusion third, always in that order. And once you get everything in standard order, then you can figure out the mood, the figure, and the form. So you know how to figure out the mood. You look at whether it's a, E, I, or O statement. In this case, the first statement is an E statement. The second statement is an I statement. The third statement is an O statement. So the mood is EIO. And then to look at the form, you look at the placement of the middle terms. So it has this pattern. If you just look at the terms themselves, they have this pattern. And the middle terms are at the end of the first and second statement. And that has a number. That pattern is known as figure 2. Now, I didn't show this to you on the slides, but if you take your textbook and look at the inside front cover on the left, it has everything that we've been talking about listed there. It talks about what the major and the minor term are, talks about what the major and the minor premises are, and then it talks about the figures. And right in the middle, it has a picture of all 4 possible figures. Figure 1, 2, 3, and 4 are all based on where the M's are. So take a look at that. You can use that. Matter of fact, on the test, I will give you a copy of those figures, so you don't have to memorize them. And you can see which figure is which. By the way, below that, they have a list of all the forms that are valid. So they tell you that EIO2 is valid, but AAA3 or whatever we had was not valid. Okay, so this is how you get the figure anyway. You look at the arrangement of the M's and figure out which one of those 4 pictures it matches. This is figure 2. And then the form is just putting those 2 together. So it's EIO2. All right, so that's it. Let me give you an example of what you're supposed to do. So page 209 has a whole bunch of examples. We're going to do those when I come back to class, right after the first test. But let's work each of these examples out. Let's work one of the examples out. I'll just work it out for you. So here we go, number 9. Here's the statement. All proteins are organic compounds, hence all enzymes are proteins, as all enzymes are organic compounds. Now this is not in standard form, and it's not in standard order. So what I need to do is change it to make it a syllogism in standard form. Okay, so the first thing I need to do is figure out where the conclusion is. Now, we want the conclusion at the end, but right here the conclusion isn't at the end. Where is the conclusion? Think about it for a minute. And you'll figure out that the conclusion has to be here. The word hence is your keyword there. The conclusion is all enzymes are proteins. Okay, once you've found the conclusion, you can start doing the rest. Once you've found the conclusion, you can identify the major, minor, and middle terms. So the major term is the predicate of the conclusion, proteins, both here and there, wherever it occurs. The minor term is the subject of the conclusion, enzymes, both here and wherever it occurs. And the last term, organic compounds, is the middle term. Now that you've done that, you can figure out which one's the major premise and the minor premise. The major premise is the one using the major term, so it's that one. And the minor premise is the one using the minor term, so it's that one. And then the one underlined in blue is the conclusion. So this is the major work you have to do. Now we've got all these organized. Now we can put it in standard order. Remember, standard order is major first, minor second, conclusion last. So it looks like this. Here's where we start. Here's what we end up with. Major first, all proteins are organic compounds. Minor second, all enzymes are organic compounds. Therefore, all enzymes are proteins. Now we've got them in order. Now we need to name its mood and figure. So here we are. The mood is AAA, because they're all A's. The figure is based on where those M's are, and it's just like one of the examples we gave before. If you look in the front of your book, that pattern is figure 2. And so the form is AAA2. Now, it doesn't ask in the question, but if you wanted to know whether that's valid or invalid, you could look below on that inside front cover of your book, and it would tell you that it's invalid. All right, that's the kind of thing you're going to be doing when we first come back. Hopefully you'll be able to work through a couple of those examples ahead of time, and it will make some sense. Come back with questions, and we'll work a lot of this out in class. Thanks.